the Heian Katas. Some people love them. Some people were quick to get rid of them. Some people just believe that they were designed for kids and they're not needed. So today, let's see what Christian Wedewardt says about the Heian Kata. Hey, what's up? I'm Ken. This is kenfuTV, and each week I release videos of the martial arts, philosophy, technique, training, that sort of thing. So if that's the kind of thing you're into, I hope you stick around. I hope that you subscribe, and I hope that if this video has value for you, that you hit that like button, you leave a comment while you're down there, and introduce yourself, ask questions, talk to each other, talk to me, whatever it is. Let's just develop this community. Some of these videos are a little bit longer, so I always make sure to drop chapter markers down in the description so you can jump to the part that you're interested in. Recently, I received this book. This is The Heian Kata Bunkai Phenomenon by Praxis and Christian Wedewardt. I've been really looking forward to this. Reached out to him recently to get a copy and have just finished reading it. And I'm really looking forward to talking about it because this was an excellent book. And there's some different things that I want to be able to talk about because of it. Christian is a person that you might have seen, especially if you're in kind of the practical karate circles, because of his approach, his practical, pragmatic approach to the martial arts. He was a competitor and did very well with that, but of a really large group, 100 plus people, only a handful of people would ever compete, but the whole school would have a tendency to focus around what was needed for that competition team. Christian came up with the idea of having a curriculum, a focus on the people who were left, the people who weren't competing. Those people, the 119 or so that were not competing, but still wanted to learn, but they were, he felt like there was just not enough focus being put there. And then rather than focus on the 2% of people that were going to compete at a high level, instead focus on the 98% of people who still needed to get something out of the martial arts. Thus was born Karate Praxis. In his own words, Karate Praxis is a stylistically independent, sport politically impartial platform with the purpose of training karate in a sense of modern tradition. I had an opportunity recently to train very briefly with Christian digitally, virtually over Zoom for a heavy bag 10 rounder with a number of people. It was Christian, it was Chris Hansen, it was Mal Sanchez Jones, Andy Allen. Really awesome. Each one of them had their own. They had two separate drills or exercises they did and looped around and put it all together, hitting on that heavy bag or hitting on a bob, whatever you were doing, and just getting some training done. And it was really cool. I really liked the approach, and I really look forward to working more with Christian as time goes on. And for now, I want to talk about something that he had to say in here. Christian opens by talking about kata itself and its value. And so on page 30, he says, "Today I view the kata as the center of our martial art, and therefore it being the roots, soul, and even the mother of karate. Nowadays, kata is the boss." He goes on to talk about how kata doesn't have to be one thing or another thing. It has different variations. Those variations are life enhancing in different ways. He goes on to say, "For me personally, kata has never been a main focus. This changed fundamentally. Reason being that our founding fathers of all the karate styles have never passed on belt testing programs to us. They never conveyed kihon topics which we are supposed to exercise, and they never dictated kumite forms as a task that has to be fulfilled. All these methods have been developed and added differently here and there in the course of many decades. What is left as a historical value, even though changed multiple times over the course of history, are katas." That's a lot to think about when you think about that. The things that we think of when we think of karate and the way that karate is trained, he's right. In a lot of ways, those things weren't passed. We were past the katas and through various levels of reverse engineering or historical study, we've come up with different ways of doing training that we think to be pretty accurate or at least pretty functional. But the kata itself is the core. He says, "Therefore, a kata is a living tradition and can be executed in many different forms." And this is the thing that I wanted to talk about. Of those, he says, they can be executed in a perfect athletic form in order to win a tournament or pass a belt testing, as a meditation form adjusted to personal age and fitness, and as a special version depending on the dojo orientation with individual focus, which I really particularly like that. He mentions right there just this concept of the fact that the kata doesn't have to be a very specific way, and that's something that I find really important. Sometimes kata is passed very exactly, and it needs to be done exactly this way, and do not change it. But I like what he says. As a special version, depending on dojo orientation with individual focus. I completely agree with that. I've watched the katas change in my school, in the school that I've trained in, the school that I now run, many times over the years, and usually related to a different focus. a different understanding, coming to appreciate the technique or the application in a new way that led to performing the kata in a different way that matches that understanding of the application. And then also this idea, what springs to mind when I hear this special version, depending on dojo orientation with individual focus. What springs to mind for me is the idea that not everybody should perform kata the same, and that two people right next to each other might perform it differently because perhaps I give a certain person a certain emphasis because of what they need to develop in themselves, and the person next to them a different emphasis because of what they need to develop in themselves. Maybe they're in different parts of the path, and maybe they're of different body type or different strength level or different whatever it is. But then that way, when they perform their kata their way, they're performing it the way that matters to them, the way that they would execute the things that they would do, and the knowledge that's contained in the kata. I think that's so incredibly important and so incredibly valuable that I just had to point that out. The book itself is about the Heian katas. Again, like I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, there are people who have stripped them out and they don't teach them at all. And you might also know them under the name the Pinan katas. And there are, historically, they were introduced into the school system. They were put together by Ankoitos of the knowledge that he had to be disseminated to the students in the school system and to build strapping military candidates. It's really what they're trying to do. They thought that could be beneficial to their country to have something in the school system that developed those features, those traits, and those characteristics in their students at an early age. People went on to believe that because of that these katas have no value. They were designed for kids. And so if you are not a kid, that they're not important, you should do something else. I wholeheartedly disagree, and especially after reading this book, I know that Christian does as well. There is incredibly good information. It's how you teach it. Just because a certain movement could break someone's neck, this is something that I learned in my own training. Just because a certain movement could break someone's neck doesn't mean that that's the movement or the application that you have to teach to a kid, and maybe shouldn't, and that was something that my instructor expressed to me, is like, hey, you know that this is what this is, but that kid is 8, and that's not the thing that they should look at when they see this. We should save that knowledge for later. Didn't mean that the kata was not functional, it just meant that they had a different focus until they were at an appropriate age or maturity level to appreciate the value of a dangerous technique and when it should or should not be shown to your best friend about how cool this is or whatever. People don't need to do that on the playground. That did not mean that knowledge was never passed. That did not mean that knowledge didn't exist. It just means that things can be taught differently over time. Something that really stuck out in the way Christian approached the katas in this book is this idea of this ongoing process. It's an ongoing and ever-building process. So he goes through each of the katas one by one, and each chapter is broken down into what the kata teaches, the learning combinations of the kata, and then a summary. Each one, 1 through 5. If you're not familiar, there are 5 of them, Shodan through Godan, and they're the different Heian katas. And so he starts off talking about what is this kata trying to convey, and then here are the actual combinations and how they might be performed, how they might be expressed and applied. And then a summary of, okay, here's kind of what we got out of this. Recognizing that the 5 katas very critically are of a whole. They were meant to be taught together, and that they represent a learning process. Christian does an amazing job of presenting that process and how along the way, as a person is learning the katas in their order, that they are also developing, they're growing older, they're growing more skillful, and there's a natural progression through the katas, but there's also a natural cyclical progression, and he goes on to talk about that. He proposes this idea that when you go through the kata initially, that there are certain skills and things that need to be acquired. And then you go on to the next kata, and that next kata, very often, is dealing with things in the first one. So maybe the first one, and this happened a number of times through his explanation of these, is maybe the first kata taught certain types of striking or attacks, offenses. And then the second kata went through and approached how to deal with those. So, okay, now you've become proficient in doing that. Now let's also look at how you would counter somebody doing it to you. And then things get progressively more complicated, more complex, as the kata goes on and you become more skillful, and then starts to introduce the concepts of range, and then just generally what happens when things move closer, move faster, are more dangerous because of the proximity to another person. And then lastly, in Pinan Godan, for example, the higher details of more advanced application of concepts that were taught earlier on. Under Christian's advisement, in the way that he sees this, the way he views this, is that initially when you go through the kata, you should learn and do things exactly as they are done. You should learn the kata, you should perform it, then you should also learn the application. A very specific, he's presenting a single application for each thing that you learn exactly. Then you go into the next kata and you learn it the same way, but at such time you also start to develop the ability to vary things in the first one. So you're not leaving that one behind, you're not getting done with it and then moving next. You're moving into the next thing and learning it exactly while learning to adapt and vary the first one. Then moving into the third one, doing it exactly while learning to adapt and vary the first two, and how they interrelate with each other, and how this new knowledge, always circling back, because the new knowledge you get in the later katas exposes something in the old katas, the initial katas that you learned. So each time peeling back the layers and creating an opportunity where you're understanding more. And encouraging the idea that that type of educational growth happens, that you don't just move from one thing to the other and then scrap it. You recognize that new knowledge always presents new understanding of previously learned things. I really, really like that approach. And he presents it in a way that you could take and you could apply. You could go and use this as a format for how you teach. You don't have to do that. For me personally, I want to take some of these ideas and I want to incorporate them into what I do. Not exactly what I'm seeing here, because I have my own ideas and I need to express those. But I really like a lot of the concepts that he's putting forth and the methods that he's looking at. And so this really is helping my approach as I work through rebuilding my curriculum, my syllabus, and how I want to teach and grow people in the art. This was invaluable. It was really invaluable to me. An important thing that he talks about, and I really liked this and wanted to share this specifically, is this: as he's going through these things, he's trying to answer two questions. And the questions are, why is this given at this certain point and exactly in this way? And where's the connection to already existing knowledge? I really think that that's important, that you ask those kinds of questions. And so he's looking at each of these katas and the katas as a whole, and going, why is it being presented this way? It's not random. It was not random. It was created this way intentionally. So what was the intent? What are we trying to understand here? And by asking those questions, it helped him see things that, to be honest, I didn't see. I didn't see until I read this and put some things together. There were things that it was kind of a confirmation for me on, that he said, that I'm like, yes, I felt that way, and it's good to hear somebody else feel that way. But there were other things that I looked at and went, oh, I haven't thought of it that way, and I am now, and that makes a lot of sense, and I understand where you're coming from, and I really liked that. All because of those questions. And how does it apply? Just like we talked about things looping back, he's got that same thing. Where is the connection to already existing knowledge? He also goes on to mention the idea that existing knowledge and new knowledge, tapping to existing knowledge, doesn't have to be from within itself. As you get further out, then your knowledge could come from something else. We're talking about karate here, but then your knowledge come from judo or aikido or different things, and then apply what you learned to your existing knowledge. Don't treat it as new knowledge. Treat it as deeper understanding of existing knowledge. Really like this. Absolutely worth a read. Absolutely worth picking this up. There's going to be a link in the description, so you need to go get a copy of this. Mostly, I'm just really thankful for the opportunity to read this book, and really thankful for Christian putting out the effort to create this. And I look forward to future projects of his, because I think he's certainly a person to pay attention to when it comes to revitalizing this modern tradition. Eagle-eyed people might have noticed that I had this book marked with a patch, and that is because I need to change a patch today. A few episodes back, I took my new Seosho Ronru patch that I had received when I renewed my membership, and I hung it on the wall. But the other day I was going through a box of things from when we had moved and ran into this one. This one is my original patch, the patch that was on my gi right from the beginning, and you can tell because it's all worn and everything else. And so this will replace that shiny new patch and go on the wall as a reminder of exactly where I came from, and love it. So you guys get to be a part of that. That is much better. Anyways, thank you guys for joining me on this. We're gonna do comments from last week, and then we'll wrap it up. But don't forget to go get yourself a copy of this book. Okay, here we are talking comments from last week's video, The Last Black Belt. A video created about the comment that was, what do you do when you are one of the last people around and you're trying to continue to make progress even though the people that you're training with are significantly lower than your experience level? And so I hope, if you haven't seen that, I hope you go watch it, but let's talk about some of the comments that you guys had on that video. So first up, Texas Space Addict says cross-train, and that is absolutely an opportunity. I really think that people need to explore that, not just as a way to learn something new, but as a way to gain perspective about something that you do. Learn your art better by cross-training with something else. Lucy LeBlanc just simply said thank you. So Lucy, you're welcome. I hope that means that this was helpful to you in some way. And if it was, I hope that there was something that you can action on in order to keep making your progress. And I'm really glad to have you here. Really glad that you watched. Thank you for your comment. Carlos Rivera says, how you feel if you have nowhere to train with and grow, and the only way is to learn on your own, reading, watching videos to progress. I don't trust these teachers here because of the negative verbal abuse I was given because my grandmaster moved me to 5th degree. Here in New York, everyone hates me. My GM only comes around sometimes. Man, it sounds like a lot. It sounds like you got a lot going on. You're right. Sometimes reading and videos and stuff is a thing. If you've got anybody in your life who is not in that position, who is not from there, that is willing to train with you, get together. Make time to do that. If there are things that you can do to make it more possible to spend time with your GM, do that. But sometimes you got to find somebody else who you can spend time with in the meantime, who you can explore things with. And hopefully you've got somebody in your life that is interested in spending, an hour or two here and there to help work on things. Good luck with that. I hate hearing about schools with negative verbal talk. It just doesn't do anybody any good. I don't find value in it. So I hope that you get an opportunity to keep doing what you're doing and keep expressing and keep making progress. Subbomina J. Condi says, hilariously, at one moment, if you don't remember the video before this one, the reason the last black belt video existed was because of a comment on the video before that, and that video was because of a comment that Subbomina made. So he's saying, hilariously, at one moment in my growth, I was alone too, which is the exact opposite. Right now, he's in a position where there are too many black belts, and now he's saying at one point, I was alone also. It's given the opportunity to take over a dying class because the instructor before had an accident. It was fun for a while. Being such an influence was a great opportunity, but I felt left behind. And I think a lot of people feel that way when they start doing a lot of teaching. A lot of the comments that I've seen, especially on Facebook, things like that. If you're watching this, realize that I read the comments from the YouTube comments. There's a lot of comments on Facebook as well, but it's just harder to keep track of all of those, so I just go off of these. But there were a lot of them that just said, you just need to, train, and you'll get a lot of stuff out of teaching people, and, work with the new students and do all this stuff, which is great, and I think that people are doing that, but that he's expressing right here is really important, this idea of being left behind. You can do all of that, and it can make you better, but that doesn't stop you from feeling like you got left behind. It's just not a part of that. And so that's while continuing to teach is important, finding that way to feel value for yourself is also important. Bryce Keeney says, I pulled up next to the car yesterday at a stoplight and looked over. It was my old sensei. I almost didn't recognize him because he was driving a Kia! I really appreciate getting jokes in the comments too. So if you got some good jokes, dad jokes, puns, all of it, any of it, drop it, because I love it. Les Bubka says, after moving to the UK, I had to start my own school. Being the only black belt in our system put me in a position of training on my own. My teacher was 1,600 miles away. For me, it was a time of the biggest growth. Having that time to focus on my own training and concepts was groundbreaking. On the subject of not afraid to take rest, I totally agree. I call it sinusoidal karate. I have waves of falling out with training and just focusing on something completely else. That sparks up my interest in karate again. Back in Poland, in our dojo, we always had 2 months break in the summer, so everyone has rest and comes back hungry for some training. Yeah, I think that's a big deal. So I make this joke. It's a thing that I believe very strongly, but it sounds funny when you put it all together. And I believe the ways to make progress are to do not, and to teach. But the funny part is if you write that together, it says do not teach. And obviously that's not true. Really, the way that breaks down for me is do the thing. If you want to make progress in the thing that you want to make progress in, do it. Do that thing. And then looping to the last one, you can also make progress by teaching the thing. But that middle one is exactly what you're saying here, Les, is do not, which for me was a shorter way of saying do something else. Do something that's not the thing, in order to become better at the thing. So I completely agree. Sometimes you have to put focus into something else. And it doesn't even have to be martial. It could be something completely different. And that can help your training, either because the knowledge that you gain doing whatever that other thing is becomes applicable, or you can find the application for it, or because sometimes it's just good to take a break. I've seen over the years many students take a break, they disappear for months, they come back and they're literally better than when they left. Their abilities and their skill is better. They're sharper, they're crisper, they look better, but they didn't do anything, right? They just took a break. So never underestimate the power of a break. Nicholas NJ says, seems like classes today are 1 hour, and karate back in the 80s classes were an hour to 45 minutes, 1 hour is not enough. I completely agree. We have busy lives now, and it's hard to do everything. I know for us, getting an hour of class is because we have 3 different classes that happen in a night. And so if any one class was 2 hours long, people would be there till 11 o'clock at night, and that's just not very viable, unfortunately. I do miss having an hour and a half class. That's what our length used to be. And I could easily do a 2-hour class, half an hour of warm-ups and basics and things like that, and then being able to really spend time. It's just more helpful, but it's just not always realistic. So I completely agree. And the idea that an hour is not enough, it's not. And unfortunately, it doesn't always mean that the school can provide more than an hour. It means that you need to find time to train with other people in your class, or you need to find time to train solo and continue to develop. Maybe you train for an hour, then you go home and you train for another hour at your house, just working on whatever concepts you worked on that day. An hour is not enough, but the dojo is not the only place that you can train. Sir James Gray says, there were a couple of periods in my life where I was left alone. My instructors were gone. I had to reach out long distance and get training via video from other senseis in my system to keep going until I connected with another in person. It happens. When it does, don't stop. Whatever you do, do whatever it takes. I think that's amazing. That's so important. People that have that drive to go find that, to do that thing, to reach out and see if you can get videos from other instructors in your system or to do other things. Those are the people who are going to grow the most. The people who don't let anything stop them. As I like to say, be unstoppable. Just be unstoppable. He goes on to say the martial arts community is vast and generous. And if there is anything this channel has shown me in being a part of it, is exactly that. And I couldn't agree more. MG tells a story, and in that story he says that this other guy across from me had been training American Kempo for a couple of years. I think he was an orange belt or something. Anyway, he was at the stage of training when people are extremely gung-ho about their practice, but everything was still a little us versus them. I know exactly what you mean, this idea, and I've done it, where I look at something else and I go, yeah, but I would just do this. I think we all do it. We see the value in what we're doing, and we want to believe so strongly that it's perfect, and it is exactly, and it has answers for everything, that we become close-minded to other things. In the story, he goes on to talk about different things. They're talking technique and they're talking different stuff. And this other guy stops him, but he doesn't tell him what he's doing wrong. He just says, I can't learn that yet. I'm just an orange belt. Another issue, this idea that certain knowledge should be gated. I do think it's appropriate that certain knowledge not be taught before other knowledge, or you do need to have time on certain things before you're ready to tackle certain things. It should never mean that you can't learn it. It should always mean that maybe you're not ready to apply it, or maybe it shouldn't have emphasis or priority right now. But there should never be an idea in your head that says, I am this rank, so I don't have the ability, or should not choose to have the ability to learn X, whatever thing. It's just not a good mindset. Any school that preaches that mindset, I struggle with, because you don't get to decide what somebody's capable of. You don't get to decide what somebody is capable of understanding. And yes, you have your things that you want them to do, the things that you want them to learn, and you might have the order that you want them to learn them in, or you might know through experience that if they don't learn this thing first, then they're going to struggle to perform the other thing. But filling someone's head with the idea that you can't do anything because of the color of your belt is just wrong. Fatality 407 says, gotta train by yourself and build relationships with other dojos. I've done it for helping my real life pressure situations. I think that's awesome. Developing relationships is one of the best ways to continue to make progress in life, in anything. Developing relationships creates opportunities, and opportunities are how we grow. Period. That's it for this week. I hope that you guys drop some comments on this video, and I'll catch you next week. Okay, that's it for this week. What books are you reading? What books have had an impact in your martial training? Please drop those in the comments. I want to hear about that. And if you have read this book, tell me your thoughts on it too. Make sure to mention that down there as well. And if you pick this book up after watching this, I hope that you come back, and I hope that you mark in the comments some of the things that you thought of or that were important to you when you read it, some of the ways that it impacted you. Anyway, that's it for this week. If you like these videos, you want to subscribe to this channel, you can do that right here. If you want a playlist of videos like this, here's that right here, and a couple more videos that you might like. I'm Ken. This is kenfuTV, and I'll catch you in the next one.